Okay, that's the same picture from last week. We're basically going to pick up mid-chapter in Genesis 49, dealing with Judah. This is the scene of Jacob's last will and testament. Just a little review from last week. That this is the final statement of the theme of Genesis and maybe the whole Bible. That is God's plan to restore the lost blessing. He made man. He made creation. He saw that it was good. He blessed man. Be fruitful, multiply, spread out, and fill the earth. Man rebelled. And then he called Abraham to begin working on that sin problem through Abraham and his promised seed. Jacob, in verse 1, calls his sons together and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days." So this is prophetic. This Genesis 49 is meant to be a prophetic chapter. And so it is not intended necessarily to be something that we can look back and say, this happened this time, and this happened this time, and so forth, but meant to be in the last days. Now, with especially Judah, I used to know the numbers. I don't hold the numbers in my head anymore. I know there are somewhere over 300 prophecies that were focused on Jesus coming the first time. Is the man Jesus born in Nazareth, who died on the cross, and there somewhere over 300. There's more like 1,000 prophecies in the Old Testament that focus on the Messiah in the end of time. And this Genesis 49 would be an example where it is more fulfilled at the end of time, and so there's still fulfillment to come. In the last days, Balaam used that in his messianic prophecy, Numbers 24, Moses in Deuteronomy 31:9, and it talks about the future deliverance of the chosen people, particularly Israel. That is the chosen people, Israel. That as that blessing spreads, though, we are also, non-Israelites are going to be blessed too. What is the common theme of those three prophetic passages is that a king is coming. And we know from verse 10, we'll see in a moment, a scepter shall not depart from Judah. And then the other two prophecies, his king shall be higher than Agag, his kingdom shall be exalted. He was the king in Jeshurun, all the tribes of Israel together under him. You put these ideas together as you read through these prophetic blessings and curses. Words like restore, restoration, blessing, deliverance that will come through Judah, a king, and in the last days. And I did make the note that I believe Joseph represented survival of Israel as opposed to salvation of Israel. I think salvation is made available to all people, but Joseph was sent to keep Israel from passing away, passing into nothing. And you know, that is one of the things people can criticize the Bible all they want, but the Israelites are the only ancient people who still hold their ancient identity. Nobody else does. What were your people 3,000 years ago, Faye? Who knows? Well, you're just like everybody else in the world. I mean, we can make some generalizations. Skin color is often a clue. Racial qualities are often a clue where maybe our ancestors were from. But the Israelites know who they are, by and large. There are some that don't know. It's unprecedented. The chapter makes a lot more sense when you begin looking at those ideas. In the order we saw last week, we start with the sons of Leah. We went through the first three sons, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. We got up to the fourth son, Judah. It's where we pick up. After the sons of Leah, the six sons of Leah, we will work on the sons of the handmaids. Each had 2 sons, and then the 2 sons of Rachel. So 6 sons for Leah, 2 for each of the handmaids, Bilhah, my mind just went, Zilpah and Bilhah, and then the 2 sons of Rachel. So having eliminated the 3 oldest sons, we come in verse 8 to Judah. Jacob says to Judah, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. You shall be the leader. You shall be the one that they defer to. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. That's just a phrase of power, ruler's power. Your father's children, your brothers, shall bow down before you. That word is used a lot, bow down. Judah is a lion's whelp, a young lion. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. So you have made a kill, and you are now lethargic. A lion gets lethargic after it makes a prey, after it kills its prey. He bows down and lies as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? So this is saying you are a conqueror, but there's going to be an intermediate period while you're sleeping, in effect, on this rulership. I say that trying to explain the metaphor there, not necessarily saying that Jesus is asleep or anything like that. Now, to be clear, Judah gets the blessing of the rulers. There's 2 significant blessings. We saw this with Jacob, and we're going to clarify the difference between them. The one is the right of the firstborn. That doesn't go to Judah. Judah doesn't get the right of the firstborn. That will go to Joseph. Joseph was given the right of the firstborn. The double portion. And maybe that's an intention of the author, and this was a thought that is fresh right now in my brain. But Joseph's 2 sons take his place, so the 2 take 1. Maybe that is intended to represent Joseph getting the double portion of blessing, because the oldest gets a double portion. I don't know. That was a quick speculation. It says in verse 10, the scepter, the symbol of your rule, shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Now, there's a lot in this verse. This verse is loaded. Let's break it down. Let's break down the parts of this verse. As I said, it is the scepter, the right of rulership. This is the blessing of the seed, but not the blessing of the firstborn. Going back, as our example, to Genesis 25, Jacob said to Esau, sell me your birthright. When Esau came in from the field, Esau said, look, I'm about to die. What is my birthright to me? I'm starving. And that is meant to tell us something about Esau's character, and I think the nature of sin. When we are in sin, we are worried about the next 5 minutes. Anything that happens after that is secondary. Sin moves you to anxiety and panic. It wants to keep you in a state all the time. So Esau swore to Jacob and sold his birthright to Jacob. All right? So that is the right of the firstborn. Contrast that, and that goes to Joseph. That is given to Joseph. Contrast that with the blessing of the ruler, which we've talked about the seed, the line of descendancy. If we go back to when Rebekah sent Jacob in to get the blessing from his father and put lambskin on his arm. Genesis 27:29, this is the blessing. May many nations, and we're going to visit that term, so mark that down in your brain, may many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. Again, that phrase, bow down. May you be the master over your brothers, prominent, descendant, the ruler of the family. And may your mother's sons bow down to you. Again, bow down is repeated. All who curse you will be cursed. All who bless you will be blessed. So inherent in that blessing of rulership, the seed, the blessing of the seed, is a repetition of the blessing made to Abraham. And it said, the next phrase in Genesis 12:3 that was said to Abraham, or then Abram, is, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed through you. And it goes on down then in 33, Esau busts in, says, Dad, I brought you the stew. Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably and said to Esau, then who just served me wild game? I've already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came, and yes, that blessing must stand. Now, we've talked already about bow down. What's the significance of bow down? Ironically, what had happened to Joseph in Genesis 37:10, he had the dream and predicted that his brothers would bow down to him. And then that was later fulfilled when his brothers went and bowed down before him when he was the regent in Egypt. That would come to Judah. Joseph is the firstborn, gets the right of firstborn, not the king. Now, is this an immediate thing? Is this going to happen right away? After Jacob does this, do we have a big bunch of stories about how the brothers bowed down to Judah? We do not. It will happen. This is an eschatological, and that just, the Greek word eschatos means last. This is in the last days. This is going to happen. So this bow down is not an immediate thing. Note, the line of Judah, as I said, is sleeping. In verse 9, who dares rouse him? A time is coming when the young lion is going to get up from his nap and he's going to start roaring. But I believe we're not yet to that point. And it is one of the things that is very important in understanding how the whole Bible works together. People say the New Testament is a book of peace, the Old Testament is a book of war. And I'll say we're very fortunate to be able to say that. The first time the Messiah comes into reality, how does he come? As a baby. Gentle. In the scriptures that refer to him, say he's knocking. He's knocking. We've seen in Revelation that when he comes the second time, he comes as a warrior king. And he rides a white horse. And he ain't knocking no more. When Jesus comes back, he comes as a warrior king, and he kicks the door in. And there's going to be nobody. There will be, actually, there's prophecy that there will be some rebellions against him at the end of the millennium. But he's gonna smack them down like nobody's business. I mean, it's not a close thing. So right now we are experiencing the sleeping lion, Jesus. And we are in, I very much believe, I dub it, we are in the period of the book. We are in the biblical period of God's plan. There's all the truth. God's going to leave it up to you what you do with it. And it is a time of peace. That's called grace. That's called grace. Don't take it for granted. Because I don't think God is always going to be so gracious to humanity. I mean, I believe the Bible, so I'm certain that he's not going to be as gracious in the future as he is right now. So we have an opportunity. That's the message there. We have an opportunity now. how are they going to know if we don't tell them? So we got to let people know. We got to stand for truth. The phrase "until Shiloh comes," and I don't want to go into a big linguistic study of the words. It has dual meaning in Hebrew. It can mean two different things. Now we all know Shiloh, the common meaning of Shiloh is peace or place of rest. Literally place of rest, that is peaceful. Shiloh is peace. And so until peace comes, we know that, speaking of the warrior king, the Bible basically tells us there's going to be war until Jesus reigns, until every knee bows. And we're not talking about believers, we're talking every knee in the world bows to Jesus' kingship, and every tongue confesses that he's the boss. Then there will be peace. As long as there is people in rebellion against Jesus, we're going to have war with us. And so it is okay to pray for peace. I don't know how much use it is for Christians to protest and to march for peace. In fact, I almost think that Christians should not be peace activists. We should hope and pray for peace. We should encourage our government to be a good government, a benevolent government. So don't get me wrong. But there's got to be war. And there will be peace before Jesus comes when the Antichrist is in charge, when there's one world government. It's not a real peace, it's an artificial peace, it's the appearance of peace. And so, when Jesus comes, finally, there will be peace. And so that is definitely a possible meaning of this phrase. But also that word, yashar. That sh is a contraction, could very well be a contraction of yashar, means which. You see which. And she, lo is to him. And that belongs, which is to him, is so you contract yashar elo in Hebrew, and you get which belongs to him, or which is his. And so it could mean, he will reign because rulership belongs to him. Okay, just so you know that. There's not going to be a quiz. You don't have to give me back any of that information. The next phrase is a little bit surprising. And to him shall be the obedience of the people. Now, the reason it is surprising is because people is plural there. And so that, yes, we say yes, all who accept Jesus are obedient to him, but that's not what that says in Hebrew. What it says is, and to him shall be the obedience of, you might say, the nations, of all peoples, of peoples. And this is something that we see a lot. This is a theme throughout the Old Testament. Let me give you some examples. People is plural in Hebrew. The Messiah will rule over peoples. Now, there is, in Jesus' first coming, in the faith that we now have, that we are here studying, there is some truth right now in peoples. Are only Hebrews worshipers of the Messiah? No, in fact, by and large, the Hebrews have rejected the Messiah. And by and large, it is peoples that are obedient to the Messiah and not the Jews, not the Israelites. And so it does have a fulfillment now, but I do think this is pointing to the end of the time that Jesus will rule over all peoples. Not just the Israelites. To Jacob, way back in 28:3, this would be a blessing to Jacob. May God Almighty bless you and give you many children. May your seed, again that in Hebrew is singular, your seed, your descendant. It is legitimate to translate that as descendants too. So that has a dual meaning. So the Israelites that come after you, but it also is pointing to that individual who become Messiah. May your seed multiply and become many peoples. Same word as in Genesis 49. Not just intended for the Israelites. Of the future Davidic king, it says in Psalms chapter 2, verse 8, only ask, and I will give you the nations. So this is plainly, that poem, that song, is clearly talking to a Jewish king. But it says, only ask, and I will give the nations as your inheritance, the whole earth as your possession. Let me ask you, when has a Jewish king ruled over the whole world? It hasn't happened. So I guess the Bible's wrong. Or there's still more to come. One or the other. You decide. I say it's because there's more to come. In Daniel, this famous scene in Daniel, we went through this right before we went into Revelation. We went through Daniel. And Daniel is having this vision. I saw someone like a son of man. So he looked like a human being. Coming with clouds of heaven, he approached the Ancient One, or the Ancient of Days. That's God Almighty. And was led into his presence. He was given authority, honor, and sovereignty over all the nations of the world, so that people of every race and language would obey him. His rule is eternal and it will never end. His kingdom will never be destroyed. I say again, is there an Israelite king that begins to fulfill that? No. Is the Messiah King David? Not if that prophecy is true. Not if this is real. And so again, I say there's a fulfillment now, because Christianity, which is the rule, the spiritual rule of Jesus over our heart, is all nations, including some Jews, but everybody. It's every color, every language. But also I think this is talking to the end of time. This is a prophecy pointing to the last days, the millennial rule of Christ, when the warrior king will rule with an iron rod. Let me modify that. If you remember, when we went through that verse, he will rule with an iron shepherd's staff, is what the term is. And that changes things. An iron rod is to go against your backside. An iron shepherd's rod is to nudge you back into line, back in where you're supposed to be. And I think that helps. I think that helps us to have a good understanding of that millennial reign. Any comments? Did I see you leaning forward, Faye? No? Are you with me on this? In Revelations 5:5 and verse 9, one of the 24 elders said to John, the author, stop weeping. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the heir to David's throne, has won the victory. He is worthy to open the scroll and its 7 seals. He is the one appointed by God to unfold human history. And they sang a new song with these words, you are worthy to take the scroll and break its seals and open it, for you were slaughtered, and your blood has ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. As we say over and over, God began a work with Abraham, and Abraham's descendants became the Israelites, and they were the carriers, they were the missionaries of God's word. But there was never an intention. There was never an intention for it to be only Hebrews that are blessed. Now, they are special to God, sure, and it's hard for them to let go of that. They don't necessarily need to, but when it comes to trying to keep the blessing to themselves, then they're in bad error, because it's always been intended for all people. So characterizing the reign of this king, we go on in Genesis 49, verse 11, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Now this is poetry. All of this is poetry, and just like in English, modern English poetry, poetry takes liberty with the language and tries to make things balanced and rhyme and paint word pictures and stuff. And it's very repetitive. I'll tell you, in Hebrew, poetry is challenging because you learn, when you're reading stories, you learn rules just like you would learn grammar for English. And it just kind of throw those out the window when you get to poetry. Nevertheless, he washed his garments in wine. Most likely, wine in the ancient days was a sign of prosperity. And so he washed his wine and garment and his clothes in the blood grapes. So wine being a luxury, in this eschatological kingdom, in this end of times kingdom, prosperity will be so abundant because of this good king that people will wash their clothes in wine rather than in water. I think gives us the gist of that image. But there is some dual meaning to this. Scripture was picked up on and has been an image in a lot of prophecies. I'll show you in a moment. He is tramping out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored, was probably lifted from this image and some of the prophecies about it. Verse 12 says, his eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk, a picture of strength and purity. This king, picking up on some of those images, Isaiah 63, I believe, is an image of an eschatological battle. I think we might have visited it when we were in Revelation. So an end of times battle. And we're looking out over a battlefield. I definitely think a lot of the images, I think scriptures like this are very influential in our view of what hell will be like. A lot of popular views of that. Just a battlefield where the buzzards have swept in, and the stench and the smoke and the cries of people. And so Isaiah 63:1. Who is this who comes from Edom? This is Dead Sea in the southern part of Israel. Edom is all around the Dead Sea and out to the eastern desert, southeastern desert from there. Who comes from Edom with his clothes stained red? Now, a couple things. Edom is the descendants of the Esau. Edom is a traditional enemy of Israel, Judah. And one of the problems with Edom and Moab is they were little guys like Israel and Judah were. And they would get a little power, they would start raiding in Israel. So they were really disliked. Anyway, who comes from Edom, his clothing stained red? Who is this in royal robes, marching in his great strength? It is I, the Lord, announcing your salvation. It is I, the Lord, who has the power to save. Why are your clothes so red, as if you've been treading out grapes? He answers, I have been treading the winepress alone. No one was there to help me. In my anger, I have trampled my enemies as if they were grapes. In my fury, I have trampled my foes. Their blood has stained my clothes. So a poetic picture, prophetic and poetic picture of the Messiah, the warrior king. This is not an image of Jesus of Nazareth. When he came in the first advent, the first coming, he didn't kill people. He didn't tramp out graves of his enemies. But a true understanding of the Messiah is the awareness that these are images of who he is also. Verse 4 and following, for the time has come for me to avenge my people, to ransom them from their oppressors, to take them back from those who would oppress and hold them down. I was amazed to see that no one intervened to help the oppressed. So I myself stepped in to save them with my strong arm, and my wrath sustained me. I find that an interesting phrase. No one helped them, the oppressed. Everybody ganged up on them, the believers. And so I have stepped in, and my sense of justice has empowered me to keep going. I crushed the nations, the peoples, in my anger, and I made them stagger and fall to the ground, spilling their blood upon the earth. We jump to Revelations 19:11. Then I saw heaven open. The white horse was standing there. Its rider was named Faithful and True, for he judges fairly and wages a righteous war. That means those who deserve it get it, both salvation and punishment. Verse 13, he wore a robe dipped in blood, and his title was the Word of God. Okay? Again, that image, that old image of garments being washed in grapes of wine. Verse 15, from his mouth came a sharp sword to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron rod. He will release the fierce wrath of God, the Almighty, like juice flowing from a winepress. So Genesis pretty much lays out the whole Bible within its book. And we see that here in 49. We jump to the end of time and the justice of God. God intended to walk with mankind hand in hand in a close relationship. Mankind rebelled. God had given them every trade, and he said, there are limits. You must be obedient. Don't eat of the tree in the middle. And man said, I think I will. I think I will. God began a plan with Abraham to restore the blessing that had been lost. And we see that come to fruition in the seed of Judah. Now we go on to the other brothers. Let's see if we can get through several of these. Verse 13, Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea, and he shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. Now, there's not a lot. It is interesting. These are poems. There's not a lot that we can latch on to for spiritual meaning in these, so I'll warn you of that. Some of them are easier than others to pick out ideas from. It is interesting. Some commentators, as you read them, will be like, well, this is, they lived by the sea. Not much can be done with that. Then others go into great detail about every little aspect. And so I don't have a lot to say. There in Joshua 19:10, 10 through 16, Zebulon was given he was given a certain allotment, and this is an extension of that allotment. This was not in the original land allotted to Zebulon. And that's all I could find on that. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. Now, both those phrases that I highlighted, rest, good, land, the land, those usher us back, our thoughts back to the garden. Those are all characteristics. God rested man in the garden, and he saw that it was good in the land. He bowed his shoulder to a burden and became a band of slaves. Possibly that is indicating he was in the garden, but he made choices, and those choices became a burden to him. And he sinned, and it became a burden to him. Now, the word Dan means to judge. That is the word judge in Hebrew. So Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heel, so that its rider shall fall backwards. I have waited for your salvation, O Yahweh. I do not know what that means. I know that in the book of Judges, the descendants of Dan act really badly. This is obscure, what this means. My guess is that each son embodies trials and eternal hopes that center on the king. So here we see an example with the serpent that bites the rider and the horse goes back. Trials that these nations will find. Dan is gone from human history. We don't know who's in the tribe of Dan. Hey, Kenny. Everything's good? Well, CD number, and I'll write you a check. I'll just drop that later. Thank you, Kenny. Woo! Did that startle anybody else? All right. So, the trials, and then there will be hope centered on this king. In that last phrase, so Dan is going to do bad stuff. Dan is going to have a bad life. Dan has disappeared from human history. I'm sure there are people in the world that say, I'm a descendant of the tribe of Dan, but I'm not aware of them. I'm not aware of that. But they wait for God to send salvation. And salvation is here, centered on this king, this descendant of Judah. We go to Gad. Now, Gad was one. Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh did not go into the promised land. They stayed on the eastern side of the Jordan. And there's wordplay. This Gad's blessing is a big pun, basically. Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. Basically, it says Gad, Gadud, Yegudnu, Yegud is basically. So it is that G-U-D, that play on the word good. And so another way that we could translate that would be, and he will raid at the hills, at their heels. So when, Gad is known for military prowess, and he will chase the bad guys out of Israel. Let's see. Transjordan tribe on the border, they fight all the time because they lived on the outlying. They're renowned as warriors. In 1 Chronicles 5:18, it says, the Gadites were valiant men who bore shields and swords and shot with bow and were skillful in battle. We go on to verse 20. Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Anybody got anything with that? There possibly, Asher was the second son of Zilpah. His name means rich. That Asher is the word rich. Because he made Leah happy. She had given up. Zilpah was her handmaid, had Asher. She was happy, so she named him the rich one, the rich son. The territory of Asher was by the wealthy Canaanite and Phoenician trade routes. So there's a highway that goes down the Mediterranean Sea, a coastal highway. Possibly it's referring to they were in a place where they traded a lot, and they got royal delicacies or things that generally only kings got because they were traders, possibly. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. This might be referring to prosperity. He has prosperity. He was the second son of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid. Now we get in verse 22 to Joseph. Joseph gets a lot, but it's also, because it's poetic language, it is very difficult to unpack. And so there's a couple different ways you can, and it's kind of amazing to see how different you can translate these words. So in the New King James it says Joseph is a fruitful bough, like a limb coming off a vine, and it's filled with fruit. A fruitful bough by a well, a source of water, and its branches run over the wall. So it's like a grapevine going over a wall. That's what the New King James says. It could also be Joseph is a son of a wild donkey. A wild donkey with eyes looking up, standing on one hill, looking up at a wild she-donkey on the other hill. And those are equally good translations of that verse. I don't know. It is poetic. It is ancient. Verse 23, the archers have bitterly grieved him and shot at him and hated him. Most likely that could be a commentary on all the opposition he faced in his adult life. Joseph had a hard trail to get where he got. Verse 24, but his bow remained his strength. Now a bow is a symbol of kingship. And his arms, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. So God has helped him, and the attacks against him have failed. From there is the shepherd and the stone of Israel. It goes on. So by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. So I don't really know. That, as I say, humbly, that is beyond mine. Now we get, though, as we go on past Joseph, I think we can kind of see. Do you notice a word I've highlighted that kind of gives us the idea that is coming? This is an idea of God blessing, restoring the blessing to Israel. Verse 49-25, by the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. So God has blessed me beyond how he blessed Abraham and how he blessed Isaac. They shall be on the head of Joseph, all these blessings. Israel is blessed. That's the way I take it. And the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. So you were lost, and you've been found, and God is going to bless you. I believe that's speaking to Israel again. Anyway, what point is the author trying to make here? I think we can see the same word with Benjamin. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour prey, and at night he shall divide spoil. All these are the 12 tribes. That is the first time that they are mentioned in the Bible and called 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father spoke to them. What is the point? He blessed them. Jacob blessed his sons. It is a blessing that will not come until the end of time, fully. He blessed each one according to their own blessing. Then we have Jacob's death and burial. Verse 29, then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. So that is the property that he bought in Israel, in the promised land, in the land of Canaan. This is very important, as I've said before, to show a legal legitimacy, land rights in the promised land. They are not invaders taking other people's stuff. They are coming back to their inheritance in the land. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with a field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. Take me back. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Heth. You got the idea? Legitimate purchase. This won't matter so much until the time of Joshua and they go back in. We have legitimate right. And they repeat it. They tell their kids. The Israelites went back to the promised land with an inheritance, claiming an inheritance. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. That is, if you need it for emphasis, the third time that he asked to be buried in the land. Take my bones back to the land. 3 in the Old Testament is for emphasis. And I believe that is the end of our chapter. Are there any questions or thoughts? That's a little bit rough to go through because it's